In early 1914, most of Europe was divided into two rival alliances. Relations between different countries in Europe have been tense for many years. On one side was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. On the other side was France, Great Britain, and Russia. Germany was a rising power that was seeking to increase its control and influence. In 1881, Germany established the Triple Alliance with Austria-Hungary and Italy, in which each nation agreed to assist the others if attacked by France, although Italy made a secret agreement with France that it would not help Germany. In 1892, France and Russia formed an alliance, and Great Britain joined the alliance in 1907. Tensions were also high in the Balkans, where multiple wars occurred as Austria-Hungary sought to expand its territory. In 1908, Austria-Hungary seized the province of Bosnia, which angered neighboring Serbia. Two separate wars involving most of the Balkan countries took place in 1912 and 1913. In late June 1914, while visiting the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife, Sophie, were assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist. Austria, suspecting Serbian involvement in the assassination, threatened Serbia, which turned to Russia for support. Austria then turned to its ally, Germany. Russia called on France. Both sides began to mobilize for war. Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia, and when Serbia failed to fully accept the ultimatum, Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. Within weeks, an assassination had led most of Europe into war. France's ally, Russia, was ready. Germany invaded Belgium in early August, leading Great Britain to declare war against Germany. Most people expected the war to be short. There were parades and celebrations in many European cities as the soldiers marched off to war. German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II wrote to his soldiers that they would be home before the leaves fell from the trees. The war soon reached a stalemate. Several attempts by each side to gain an advantage ended in bloody failures. Along the front lines, the opposing armies began digging trenches just a few hundred yards apart from one another. Long lines of trenches, hundreds of miles long, separated the two armies. Life in trenches was miserable. Soldiers spent entire days below ground level. When it rained or snowed, the trenches flooded and soldiers spent most of their time walking through cold water several inches deep. Any soldier who raised his head out of a trench was liable to be shot. Many soldiers developed a severe fungal infection known as trench foot, which could lead to gangrene and amputation. Rats were common, and there was also a horrible smell from rotting flesh, poor hygiene, overflowing latrines, disinfectant, and poison gas. By Christmas 1914, each side had suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties. Then, on Christmas Eve, the Germans lit candles on tiny Christmas trees on the parapets of their trenches. They were visible for all to see, and British soldiers began to hear something remarkable from the German trenches.
I thought, well, a very different Christmas this is going to be from any I've spent up till now, feeling pretty miserable altogether. Then, all of a sudden, lights appeared all along the German trench, and I thought, well, there's a funny thing. And then the Germans started singing, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. I woke up. Well, all the other sentries did the same thing. We all woke up the other people to come along and see this. They finished their carol, we applauded them, then we thought we must retaliate in some way, so we replied with, The first Noel. And so we went on, first the Germans singing one of their carols, then we'd sing another of ours. Then we started up, O come, all ye faithful, and the Germans immediately joined in singing the same thing to the Latin words of Adeste Fideles. Well, I thought this was rather an extraordinary thing, really, to think of the two nations both singing the same carol in the middle of a war. Unknown British soldier.
German soldiers emerging from their trenches called out Merry Christmas in English. Some had worked in England before the war or had learned English in school and were able to communicate in it. At first, the British soldiers suspected a trick. But seeing the Germans unarmed, they climbed out of their own trenches. Soon, large numbers of soldiers on both sides left the trenches and walked out into no man's land. The Christmas truce of 1914 had begun.
We shook hands, wished each other a Merry Christmas, and were soon conversing, as if we'd known each other for years. Here we were laughing and chatting to men whom only a few hours before we were trying to kill. British Corporal John Ferguson, Seaforth Highlanders.
We gave them cigs, jam, and corned beef. They also gave us cigars, but they didn't have much food. I think they're hard up for it. They were fed up with the war. They had come out of the trenches for a few days of rest, commenting that it was nice to sleep away from the wet, although they were sleeping in their clothes still. Private Frederick James Davies, 2nd Battalion Royal Welsh Fusiliers.
German soldiers even rolled barrels of beer they had seized from a nearby brewery across no man's land to the British trenches, where they raised toasts to one another's health and united in agreement that French beer was rotten stuff. British soldier Francis Philip Woodruff.
In Armentières in northern France, the rival armies set up soccer matches in no man's land.
They marked the goals with their caps. Teams were quickly established for a match on the frozen mud. German Lieutenant Johannes Niemann.
I wouldn't have missed the experience of yesterday for the most gorgeous Christmas dinner in England. British soldier, December 26, 1914.
The truce also allowed soldiers on each side to come out and retrieve bodies of recently killed soldiers. It is not known exactly where the truce began, but it appears to have started spontaneously in many locations along the front. An estimated 2/3 of British-held portion of the Western Front joined the truce. In some places, the truce lasted through the day after Christmas. In others, it lasted through New Year's. Reaction to the truce by military commands was negative. Concerned it would interfere with the soldiers' willingness to fight, British Expeditionary Force Commander John French issued orders that such ceasefires should never happen again and threatened court-martial to anyone who disobeyed. German soldiers were redressed by an officer who ordered the men to start shooting, saying, "Fire or we will, and not at the enemy." German soldiers reportedly responded by firing above the heads of the British troops, wasting ammunition and trying to shoot the stars down from the sky, as one German soldier put it. Soldiers who refused to fire their weapons found themselves transferred to different locations along the front, where enemy soldiers had not participated in the truce and were firing at them. Military leaders tried to prevent news of the truce from spreading, but news leaked out primarily through soldiers' letters. The story appeared in British newspapers about a week after the truce. The truce was over by early January 1915, and the army soon went back to fighting. They spent the next 4 years trying to break the stalemate along the Western Front, and individual battles resulted in each side suffering hundreds of thousands of casualties in order to advance a few miles. There were isolated instances of truces afterward, but nothing on the scale of the Christmas truce of 1914 ever occurred again. There are many reasons for this. First, commanders on both sides had reacted strongly to the 1914 truce, and had issued orders warning against future fraternization with the enemy. Second, while the first months of the war had been bloody and harsh, the horrors of the post-1914 battles created a hatred on each side which had not been as fully developed in the beginning of the war. Each side also used propaganda to demonize the other side. There are a few efforts to establish truces. On Easter 1915, one German unit attempted to enter no man's land under a flag of truce, but the British unit opposite them warned them off. More commonly, the two sides would establish informal truces in quiet parts of the front with unspoken agreements not to fire at one another during certain times of the day, such as mealtimes. The Great War did not end all wars, but instead laid the foundation for a Second World War a generation later. The only tangible effect the Christmas truce had on the war is that the officers in charge went to greater lengths to prevent something like that from happening again. If the truce had been allowed to continue, it could have spread to other parts of the Western Front. If the soldiers had spent more time together, they might have refused to fight one another. Perhaps, if newspapers had reported it more widely, support for peace might have grown, and the world leaders would have a more difficult time convincing people to continue supporting the war. Reports about what happened during the truce aren't always the same. Our information comes mostly from letters and eyewitness statements from soldiers who were often at different parts of the front. But those who took part in the truce know what happened. To them it was a rare moment of peace and joy in a place where there wouldn't be any for a long time to come. They had a chance to stop and enjoy the holidays, talk, sing songs, and just get a break. For the soldiers, it was a holiday miracle. We can still learn a lot from the Christmas truce more than a century later. It shows us that there are alternatives to war and that people can get along if given the chance. People who are enemies can actually have a lot in common, and if they get to know each other, they are less likely to distrust each other. The more that people understand one another and think of each other as human beings, the harder it is to convince them to go to war. The Christmas truce is a remarkable example of how soldiers who were expected to participate in one type of encounter created a completely different type of encounter. Instead of exchanging gunfire, they exchanged gifts. Instead of rejecting other ideas and cultures, these soldiers explored them and found that they shared many of the same feelings about the war. A century later, the Christmas truce is strong evidence that individual acts of kindness and friendship are possible, even when nations are supposed to be bitter enemies.